Berserk is a dark story, there's no doubt about that. But in amongst all the apostles, astral creatures, strugglers, and Griffith, it is very easy to forget that ultimately, most of this world's suffering is being inflicted upon it by humans. I mean, the idea of evil literally claims to have been created by the swirl of negative thoughts and emotions shared by humanity's collective consciousness. And if you're one of those people who deny Chapter 83's existence, then we don't know how else to break it to you. So we thought that for this video, we'll do something different. We'll take a step away from the spotlight and take a look at some of the human beings of this world who are arguably just as bad as, if not worse than at least some of the apostles. So without further ado, these are the worst human beings in Berserk, explored. Before we get into our video, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Number 1. The Mayor of Koka. It says a lot about what your series is going to be like when its first proper side character turns out to be a despicable, skin-saving politician. But that's Berserk, baby. The Mayor of Koka was the perfect vessel for introducing us to the selfish, self-centered world of the nobility of Berserk, which ends up becoming a massive theme in the overall story. When Guts arrives at Koka looking for the Snake Baron, he notices a wagon full of women and children being sent towards the castle. After causing a bit of black swordsman chicanery in the local pub, he ends up getting captured by the city guard, whose first instinct is to torture the man mercilessly. Guts had endured literal hell at this point, so a bit of casual whipping was nothing to him. But this scene is ideal for showing us the facetious nature that many humans have in Kentaro Miura's masterpiece. Despite ordering his torture, the Mayor of Koka tries to make himself out to be a savior-type figure by giving Guts a temporary respite and actually interrogating him. He takes the Black Swordsman's stockpile of weapons to mean he's a mercenary, and vehemently asks him whether he knows just what he's done. The Mayor claims that because of Guts' actions, the entire town might as well be destroyed, and the Black Swordsman claps back by asking him if his guards were animated scarecrows. He tries to counter by telling Guts he knows nothing about the master of those men, which is kind of crazy in itself because Guts has literally been hunting apostles for 2 years at this point. It quickly becomes clear just why the Mayor was so concerned with Guts' actions. He was actually worried about his own skin. Remember how we mentioned that Guts crossed a wagon full of women and children on his way into the city? Well, turns out the Mayor was sending them to Koka Castle as meals for its current ruler. What makes this heinous act of self-preservation even more disgusting is the fact that the Mayor actually had a mini anxiety attack when Guts accused him of saving his own skin. He immediately ordered his torturer to go to work on Guts, but to make sure he stays alive as he personally begs the Snake Baron's forgiveness. But even the Apostle knows just how slimy and cowardly the Mayor is, and instead of forgiving him and accepting his offer for more gold and food, he straight up kills the guy. We didn't even feel anything when this weak old man was dragged off to his death because it's the same thing he subjected who knows how many women and children to. The Mayor of Koka represents the worst kind of self-preservation instinct that we as humans possess, because he wasn't just fine with sacrificing others for his own safety, he was delusional enough to justify it as the right thing. This let us know that this isn't going to be a story where we'll find benevolent and righteous leaders, and oh boy were we right about that. Number 2. Teresia's parents. A portion of our audience might argue that this doesn't apply to both of Teresia's parents, but we'll explain why we think it does. Let's start with Teresia's mom, the obvious bad parent in the scenario. We're sure that she must have given Teresia the requisite amount of love and affection that is expected of a noblewoman to give their children, but it's very evident that Teresia was kept in the dark about her mom's true life. Teresia's mother was a heretic and a part of a pagan cult, despite knowing full well that her husband was a devout adherent of the Holy See. What makes her truly terrible is not the fact that she threw a pagan coitus party in the Count's main hall, but the fact that she knew he loved her more than she loved him, and she used it to her advantage. When the Count saw his wife swimming in a sea of flesh and sin, he blacked out and killed everyone in the room except his beloved. When he moved to give her the same fate as her heretic pals, she stretched her arms out, knowing it would disarm him, and it worked. The Count, for all his hatred of paganism, loved his wife too much to kill her, so he ended up trying to kill himself. And this is where he proves that he is a terrible human being as well. The Count was a loving husband and a doting father, But he was also a cruel fanatic who brutally suppressed heresy in his domain and likely terrorized many of the people he was supposed to be protecting. When he realized that his wife was a part of the very thing he hated, instead of committing himself to his ideology or her, he chose to escape both. In his despair, his blood spilled over his behelit and summoned the God Hand, who promised him they would end his suffering in exchange for one sacrifice, his wife. Considering what he had just witnessed, the Count didn't hesitate, and in fact ended up devouring the sacrifice with his many apostle mouths. In his new life as a demonic reincarnate, the Count's heretic hunt didn't become insanely intense, it just went up a degree. He was always a brutal suppressor and a religious fanatic, but now the hunt became a pretext for gathering more food. Though he truly loved his daughter Teresia and wanted nothing but the best for her, he came very close to sacrificing her a second time just so he could stay alive. Yes, the Count ended up choosing not to do that, but one redemptive act on his literal deathbed does not excuse the horrors he committed in his previous lifetime. That massacre he left in his wake when he caught his wife with a goat statue was not the work of a normal or nice person. And these two are just the beginning of a whole host of bad parents that populate the pages of Berserk. Number 3. Gambino. This one might confuse a few people considering how important his character ends up becoming to Guts' development, but Gambino was probably the worst stepdad that any child could have asked for. He didn't want anything to do with Guts in the first place, and from the day Shisu picked him up from underneath his mother's corpse, Gambino treated the boy like a pure afterthought. That all changed when Shisu died and Guts was all he was left with. And if we put Gambino's actions under an objective, analytical lens, then all of his actions screamed red flags from well before he started making Guts' life hell. When Shisu was on her deathbed, Gambino was off fighting in a siege, and he knew she had the plague and was trying to raise a child, but he left her to her fate anyways. After that, he turned Guts into his personal squire and page, at the age of 6. He took a literal child to the battlefield and while training him in arms, cut his nose to the bone because Guts managed to land a good counter on him. Gambino's life lessons were harsh and they allowed Guts to survive in a blood-soaked world, no doubt. He taught the Black Swordsman how to think for himself and flourish in the deceit-filled world of mercenaries. But he did it by using Guts as a decoy, and he probably hoped to be rid of him in that moment too. Because Gambino hated Guts from the very beginning, he just never showed it. Looking back at the number of times he put the boy in the line of danger, it becomes chillingly clear that Gambino was practically praying Guts would die one of those days. When the future Black Swordsman reached an age where that didn't seem likely anymore, he began treating a literal dog better than Guts, who would become his caretaker at that point. Gambino blamed all his misfortunes on Guts, including Shisu's death, when he was the one who abandoned her in her final moments. And he officially claimed his worst dad ever trophy by trying to kill the boy his partner had nursed to life. Though Gambino had ridiculed his partners as being superstitious for thinking Guts was an ill omen when they came across him 11 years ago, he now fully believed in it because it explained all the misfortunes of his life. Guts didn't even kill his father willingly. It was done out of self-defense, but he continues to believe he was a father killer well into his adult life. Now, you might be thinking that everything we've told you so far makes Gambino seem nihilistic and not malicious, and that his treatment of Guts could actually somehow end up making sense. But we haven't told you his worst offense against the boy who thought he was his dad. And if you've only seen the Berserk animes, then this might be a bit of a shock for you. Number 4. Donovan. The night of Guts' first battle, Gambino was very proud of him. The boy gave him his day's earnings as discussed, and he gave Guts a coin in exchange for working hard in the field. That night, the boy went to bed with something that can be called a smile adorning his somber mug, when a familiar face walked into his tent. It was Donovan, one of the mercenaries who worked under Gambino. Guts was confused as to why Donovan, of all people, would come into his tent this late at night, but his confusion turned into horror when Donovan tried to pin him down. Guts fought back hard, but Donovan disarmed him by telling him that he should quit it because he paid Gambino good money for having Guts for the night. For 3 silver coins, Gambino had sold out his supposed son, and hearing this broke Guts emotionally. He was taken advantage of at the age of 9, and when he tried to confront Gambino about it, he thought that Donovan was lying because of how normal and calm the mercenary leader was behaving the morning after. Guts ended up killing Donovan in the next battle his band was enlisted to fight in, but the damage had already been done. The assault left Guts with severe PTSD, to the point where he would violently repel anyone trying to touch him. This was only compounded upon by Gambino's revelation that he did in fact sell out Guts just before he tried to kill him for being such a burden. Donovan haunted Guts' psyche for years, showing up in the fever dream he had right after Griffith near mortally wounded him in their first confrontation. He showed up again in Guts' thoughts right as the swordsman was affirming his love for Casca, which caused Guts to go into a complete mental breakdown. Had Casca not been as understanding and loving as she was in that moment, there's no telling if Guts would have been capable of overcoming this issue at all. After finding positive love with Casca, Guts' PTSD subsided until it resurfaced during his Black Swordsman days, which were also his lowest as a human being. Donovan's assault on Guts is one of the most senseless and inhumane acts of violence in all of Berserk, because it was passed off as being a common occurrence in mercenary bands. It left Guts with over a decade's worth of trauma, and shows you that Berserk isn't a series that is just overtly violent towards women in particular. It destroys people from all walks of life. Number 5. Julius. We knew Julius was a bad dude when he slapped Griffith for catching Princess Charlotte just because he was a commoner, but we didn't know just how low he was willing to stoop to retain his position as he saw it. To give you guys an idea of just who this man is, Julius was the brother of the King of Midland and the leader of the White Dragon Knights, an elite squad of sworn swords whose sole duty was to protect the king at all costs. Having grown up as a noble, Julius took immense pride in his position and lineage, to the point of arrogance. He resented Griffith for his natural rise through the ranks because Griffith was not nobility, and he tried to have him killed because of it. He was also sleeping with his brother's wife and had a rather tough love approach towards parenting. Granted, Julius had lost his own wife years ago and was never quite the same after, but it did not give him the right to injure his son during sparring sessions just so Adonis could grow up quickly. And he was also likely plotting to take over his brother's throne, considering the only child the king had was a daughter, which put Julius second in line. If Adonis could prove himself as a warrior at an early age, he could assume command of both the White Dragon Knights and Princess Charlotte's heart, or at least that's what Julius wanted for him. Adonis just wanted to spend some father-son time with his dad, not become the object of his frustrations during training, and yet that is exactly what ended up happening. Julius was a prime example of the kind of highbrow nobility that is commonplace in Berserk. He was brash, brutal, and ridiculed the common folk at every step of the way. He ended up paying for this underestimation with his life, and trust us when we say no one was sad about it. Well, except for maybe one person whom we'll get to in a minute. Number 6. Minister Foss. There are a lot of slimy, self-serving politicians in Berserk, as you can see from our list. But you have to be a special kind of weasel to do a complete 180 and start licking the boots of the man you once tried to have killed. And yet, that is exactly what Minister Foss ends up doing when he is brought back during the Millennium Falcon arc. Foss was introduced as the ultimate pot stirrer in the Midland court. It was he who encouraged Julius to try and dispose of Griffith during the autumn hunt, and suggested using poison as a means of dispatching. When Julius's assassination attempt failed, and he ended up dead instead, Foss immediately tried to goad Griffith into taking blame. Though he would have been right in doing so, Foss underestimated the White Falcon. Griffith didn't bite on his trap, and instead turned the tables on him in a rather chilling way. After the Band of the Falcon managed to win in a situation thought to have been unwinnable previously, those members of the Midland court who resented Griffith's rapid rise realized that they would only get one shot to rid themselves of him for good. This cabal of conspirators decided to poison Griffith with a lethal dose and end his life on the night he was to be appointed the White General Phoenix of the newly promoted White Phoenix Knights. Foss was the one who brought this cabal together and provided the poison. He also had every member sign a blood oath, which shows you just how serious he was in going through with it. His reasons for opposing Griffith were quite similar to Julius's. He too thought that the White Falcon's ascent had been too rapid for one of his stature, and wanted to ensure that his own position of power would not be threatened as a result. He didn't expect to have been made due to a single scared look, and so when Griffith kidnapped Foss's daughter and forced him to turn against his co-conspirators, the minister could do nothing but comply. He thought that Griffith was a cruel man afterwards for being able to smile after having torched a significant portion of the royal court. But really, Foss was just covering up his own slimy nature by looking for someone else to blame. When he returns in the Millennium Falcon arc as one of the leaders of the rebel resistance in Wyndham, you can see his stance on Griffith has done a total 180, and he now practically worships the man. This isn't because Foss believes in Griffith's vision or anything, although he says so himself after a council meeting in Falconia. A combination of fear and the mesmerizing ode of the god hand Femto are what make Foss so docile in Griffith's presence now compared to before. And it does not make him a better character by extension. It simply exposes his opportunistic and selfish nature, if anything. Number 7. Adon Coborlwitz. Rarely does a Berserk character come off as annoying, and that's exactly what Miura managed to accomplish with Adon Coborlwitz. The leader of the Blue Whale Attack Assault Ultra-Armored Panzer Tank Knights is the closest thing to a caricature of a villain you're going to find in the entire story. He's loud, very proud of his masculinity, and very comfortable with treating women like objects instead of actual people. He constantly boasts about his own battle prowess, yet comes up short every time. And if you've only seen the 1997 anime, you're going to think that we're stretching things by putting him on this list. But go read the manga and you'll understand why he's here. While Adon Coborlwitz is undeniably the goofiest antagonist in all of Berserk, he is still nothing short of disgusting. He threatens to give over Casca to his men for their entertainment multiple times, and even claims that she slept her way to the top in the Band of the Falcon. He isn't even trying to play mind games here. Adon actually means it. He sees his men as nothing more than fodder for the enemy, and doesn't even mourn the death of his brother Samson, instead celebrating his own survival and bragging about it in the aftermath. He's the ultimate chick poop heel, and as funny as their antics are, it's easy to forget that they're called heels for a reason. Adon is just as bad as the other soldiers we've mentioned on this list, but maybe not as bad as... Number 8. Gennon. If you're a character that shares tastes with Vladimir Harkonnen, then you're already pretty crappy as a person in our books, and that's why Governor Gennon was pretty much a no-brainer for us. He was introduced to the story as a means to an end utilized by Griffith in the pursuit of his dream. Gennon was a man with unusual sexual preferences. He went against the grain, so to speak, and so when he employed the White Falcon's band for his own battles, it was only a matter of time before he went after Griffith. He's so beautiful, after all, who could have resisted him? But don't let Griffith's beauty distract you from the fact that Gennon, like the Baron from the Dune novels, was not into men, but boys. He would have children kidnapped from villages and brought to his castle to serve as pages, but in truth, he would simply abuse them as and when he saw fit. When Casca saw these kids for the first time, she could identify with the look of abject terror in their eyes because she herself had nearly fallen victim to that kind of violence. But where she got away, they didn't. What makes Gennon even more disgusting is the fact that he seems to not even realize that he's doing morally reprehensible things. When he learns that Griffith is the one leading the attack on Doldry, he orders his general to bring him the White Falcon alive so he could spend another night with him. Gennon then personally assures his own destruction by falling for Griffith's trap and committing his forces to a doomed charge. His lust has blinded him so much that he actually thinks Griffith loved him and wants him back, and Gennon flies into a rage when the White Falcon reveals his true talons. Gennon dies with a saber through his brain, and it was frankly too kind of an ending for him. Number 9. The Queen of Midland. The Queen of Midland is pretty much on this list for all of the same reasons as General Julius, but with a few important distinctions. The Queen is technically the second reigning First Lady of the realm of Midland. The king's first wife passed away a long time ago, and so he decided to remarry for the sake of his kingdom. He took a new bride from a foreign land and performed every duty expected of him by custom and law, yet he never loved her. Their marriage was purely political, which is why the Queen ended up betting Julius. But what makes her such a repulsive character is the fact that she did it out of pure lust. The Queen wouldn't realize that she loved Julius until after his death, and when she did, she decided to kill Griffith in revenge. She was also one of the only people in Berserk to openly display her disdain for Griffith as a commoner, when she tried telling off Charlotte for mingling with people like him. Her haughty attitude and her highbrow design made it very easy to hate her already, but her deeds matched her appearance. But while the Queen was always shown to be a terrible person, the same could definitely not be said for her royal counterpart, which is why when we saw his true colors come out in the series, we nearly threw up in real life. Number 10. The King of Midland. When the King of Midland was first introduced in the story, we thought he was a pretty chill guy. He liked Griffith's cojones, disliked the status quo, and actually cared about the safety of his people and spoke and behaved like a distinguished ruler should. The king definitely earned brownie points from the community for placing his implicit trust in the White Falcon's ingenuity, and his equal treatment of a lowly commoner like Griffith made him stand out from the rest of the court as a man who knew a real gem from a fake one when he saw it. This is why it disgusted us to no end when we learned that the reason behind the king's loveless marriage to his wife was his lust for his own daughter. In Charlotte's very first appearance, the king admitted to Griffith in guts that he had spoilt his daughter because she is his only child. He seems to have been married to the queen for quite some time, but the king seemed unbothered with creating a new heir, which should have been his priority considering his only child was a female. Before her death, the Queen of Midland thinks to herself that perhaps the king never got over his first wife at all, and it reviles us to even say this, but this is why he fancied his daughter. God, I'm gonna need some soap for my mouth by the time this video's over. What's worse is Griffith manages to deduce this while the king is seeing to his torture personally following his seduction of Charlotte, and this is the moment that breaks the king. He tries to assault Charlotte immediately after he orders Griffith's year-long torment, and when he fails, he directs all his energy towards destroying the White Falcon. The king sends out Bakiraka assassins, Wild's devil dogs, and eventually dedicates 70% of his forces to hunting Griffith down. His lust for his daughter drives him insane, to the point Charlotte rejects seeing him upon his deathbed, and he dies dreaming of Griffith stealing her away from him yet again. The King of Midland is undoubtedly one of the most disgusting characters in all of Berserk, and no one could have guessed this when he first debuted, unless you can deduce a man's true nature from his beard and his eyebrows. Number 11. Rosine's dad. Children grow up about as well as their environments allow them to. We feel like this is a known thing, and while it is true that a child's inherent drive to strive is also important, the upbringing is what matters more. By that standard, we can kind of understand why Rosine ended up becoming an apostle. Jill's childhood best friend seemed like an upbeat, cheerful, adventurous, and dreamy girl on the surface. She'd play in the woods for hours, collect weird trinkets like a stone egg with a disheveled face, and always had a wide smile plastered to her face. But the real Rosine would always show herself when she spoke of the legend of Pikaf the Outcast, and the fact that she likened herself to him should have sent alarm bells ringing off in Jill's head. And the worst part of it all is, causality decided upon a particularly harrowing journey for Rosine to apostlehood, because her backstory is about as dark as it gets in Berserk. Years ago, her village was attacked by a group of enemy soldiers who ravaged the land and the women. Rosine's mother was one of those women, and her father could never quite accept her as his own because of that. Thus began a lifetime of abuse. Rosine's dad, who should have been the one protecting her, was the one making her life living hell. He would constantly abuse both her and her mother, and though they did have their quieter moments, it wouldn't last for long. Soon enough, Rosine went from likening herself to Pikaf to thinking she was Pikaf herself, and when her father crossed the line with his abusive behavior one day, she finally snapped. Rosine went to the Misty Valley, leaving all her belongings to Jill except for the Behelit in order to find the elves, but ended up facing disheartening disappointment. Her deepest fears came true when she realized the elves were no longer at the Misty Valley, but before she could decide on her next move, her parents showed up. Rosine's mother was delighted to have found her. She was dead worried about her daughter, who had randomly decided to run away to the woods with no explanation whatsoever. But her husband had a different opinion. Rosine's father immediately struck her and started berating her for making his life hell. He went off on a tangential tirade and ended up drawing blood from his own daughter. It's bitter irony knowing now that he could have avoided becoming a sacrifice to demonkind by showing just a hint of kindness that day. Rosine's father is one of those characters you cannot defend or explain, and that's what makes him such a horrible person in our opinion. But if you think Rosine is the only one who had things bad, then her childhood friend's life was no better. Number 12. Zepek. Pride can make a man perform great deeds or horrible misdeeds, and in the case of Zepek, it's the latter. If the reason for Rosine's father being an absolute d-bag to his family was the fact that he couldn't get a DNA test in the medieval era, then Jill's dad comes off as even pettier, because he just thought he was getting disrespected all the time. Zepek was a former soldier who had fought and bled for his country, and his pride in his time as a warrior was not misplaced. What was misplaced was his treatment of his wife and child, because he somehow got it in his head that he should be treated like royalty because of his time in the army. Zepek was an alcoholic who drank from morning till evening and would frequently abuse both his wife and daughter just because they dared to speak their own minds. In his twisted worldview, that was disrespect, and he let you know it loud and clear. What makes him an even worse father in our mind is the fact that he led Farnace's holy iron chain knights to the Misty Valley not to rescue his daughter, who'd been kidnapped by a friggin' apostle and murder elves, but to taste the glory of the field once again. Zepek was all too content to let Adon sing his praises and think he was doing this all for Jill, but as soon as he got sidelined, he showed his true colors. The look of pure joy he had on his face when his arrow hits Guts after his fight with Rosine, and the disdainful frown that followed upon being dismissed. You guys should just be happy the Lost Children arc hasn't been animated yet. That's all we're saying. But you know what has been animated? Number 13. Mozgus. This mad lad has a body count higher than most private armies, and the worst thing about him is he defended it all by calling it faith. You guys need to remember that Father Mozgus was only a pseudo-apostle for like one night. Most of his horrific deeds were committed during his human life, and trust us, there were a lot of those. As an inquisitor for the Holy See, it was his job to hunt down heretics and bring pagans to justice. But Father Mozgus took this to heights of sadism Berserk hasn't reached since the Conviction arc. His complete apathy towards the victims of his torture is frankly spine-chilling. And yes, we say victims, because despite being whatever he believes them to be, no one should be subjected to the kind of things Mozgus thinks are okay in the name of God. His torture chamber is arguably the second most horrifying location after the site of Griffith's Eclipse. And that is saying something. His unmoving conviction in the idea that his actions were justified because scripture says so is what makes him the Holy See's best inquisitor and the general populace's worst nightmare. We don't think a single tear was shed when people realized Mozgus was shish kebab after the egg of the perfect world made him a pseudo, because that means his presence makes Guts' brand itch and bleed, and we all know what follows after that. Number 14. Federico De Vandimion. You know, with all of Farnace's faults and flaws, we kind of get that girl, because if our dads were as negligent as Federico De Vandimion, then we too might have gone off the rocker just a little bit. Okay, maybe not as much as Farney, but just a little bit. And at least our girl is on one of the best redemption arcs of all time, so, you know, we'll allow her this one. But her dad, well, not so much. As the wealthiest man in the Holy See city of Ratanus, Federico wielded considerable political power within the world. He was what Griffith once described as a key in the world, one of the true elite whose station matched their influence. Federico officially had 4 kids, with Farnace being his youngest. But because she was a girl and Federico had ambitions, he ended up ignoring her all the time. Federico was too busy grooming his sons to get into key positions of power to give time to a daughter whom he viewed as getting increasingly unhinged. And to make things worse, he was about as forgetful as you could expect him to be. Federico once took Farnace on a family vacation and bought her a teddy bear. It became her most prized possession, but a few years later, he asked her to throw the ugly toy away, as he could always get her new ones. He was ignorant of her attachment to the toy, and Farnace, having been taught obedience, obeyed. Her violent streak was an expression of her childhood loneliness, and Federico directly fed it by being the worst kind of absentee father, one who was actually there. Things get even murkier when you realize that he's basically Serpico's dad because he knocked up his mom when she was a maid at his manor, and that to protect his own influence, he made the boy swear not to tell anyone his true lineage, even Farnace, whom Serpi now served. Federico sweetened the deal by promising to see Serpico's mom, but of course he never did it. It is also very frustrating that he made Serpico give up all claims to nobility as a Vandimion because he's arguably the best of all his children. He can fight, cook, sew, recognize every heraldry in the planet, and had a steady head in times of war and peace. Basically, he's what everyone would want in a son and heir, except, well, he's illegitimate. Federico is also a shrewd politician because he tried to discredit Griffith's liberation of Ratanus by getting all technical about it being Holy See territory and not Midland territory. Federico felt real smug when he said that only the pontiff could decide whether their leader was the Falcon of Light or not, and it was some sweet, sweet comeuppance to see His Holiness confirm the former by performing prostration for Griffith. Out of all the nobles on this list, Federico is the only one who could have actually avoided it by just being a little more present with his only daughter. Alas, that's too much to expect from this list, apparently. Number 15. Kushan General. Okay, we're just gonna come out and say it. What this guy said to Salat was borderline racist, and we're not sure if that's possible because technically they're both Kushan to the bone. But this Kushan general, who was in charge of the siege of Shet, showed us that evil men didn't just exist in the western half of Berserk's world. They were also present in the east. Salat and his Kushan scouts were tasked with the impossible mission of tracking and capturing the Falcon of Light. Because how in the world can you imprison a member of the God Hand? Yet, they gave it their best and managed to trace Griffith all the way to his incarnation in St. Albion. Salat immediately ordered his men to accomplish their mission for the glory and restoration of their exiled clan. But no human could have possibly reached Griffith as Nosferatu Zod intervened at that exact moment. Salat, having failed his objective, did as any military officer would and reported back to his superior. But instead of being taken seriously, he was thoroughly disrespected. This Kushan general decided to remind Salat his place by putting a foot on his head and reminding him why the Bakiraka had been exiled in the first place. He recalled the clan's ancient history as slaves, and how them turning their cloaks on the current royal dynasty earned them their exile. The way this Kushan general was talking smack, we'd have slapped him for Salat, but props to our guy, he didn't give in. Instead, he saved the general from an assassination attempt, and was about to make a badass exit when Griffith instant transmissioned onto the battlefield and killed the general all of a sudden. We'll be honest, even though we hate Griffith and can find no reason to think he wasn't wrong, we low-key cheered for him here because goddamn was this Kushan general one of the worst people we've seen in Berserk, period. But you know the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And while that's mostly used in a familial context, it can also be applied to people as a whole. And the tree this apple fell off was rotten to the core since the age of 6. Number 16. Emperor Ganishka. Ganishka was introduced to Berserk as the strongest apostle, bar none. And to have that much power, one needs to commit some pretty horrible crimes in their lifetime. Our boy took that challenge head first as a literal toddler. Ganishka was the eldest son of the Kushan Emperor, and was destined to succeed him to the throne, but his mother favored his younger brother. So, when he was 6, she tried to poison him so that her favorite son could become emperor instead. But somehow, Ganishka survived. This marked a change in his life as he transformed into a ruthless politician in person in general. Ganishka retaliated to his mother's treachery by taking care of his little brother. She committed suicide out of grief shortly thereafter. As he grew up in the den of snakes that was the Kushan royal court, Ganishka survived by becoming the most venomous viper, stamping out oppression at the slightest hint. He was already destined to become king given his place in the hierarchy, but he killed his dad just because he saw the fear he had for his own son in his eyes. And even after becoming emperor, he didn't rest. Ganishka launched a global conquest that committed war crimes that would make World War II-era Japanese death marches look like slightly difficult marathons. The atrocities his men committed in his name were all justified in his mind, as long as all lied within the palm of his hand. And all this was before he became an apostle. After that, his depravity knew no bounds as he enlisted Daiba for the construction of the man-made Behelit and employed demonic Daka and Pishacha forces in his world conquest. Ganishka's brutal, overwhelming approach to war is a product of his fear, and as Frank Herbert's Dune so eloquently puts it, fear is the mind killer. It killed Ganishka's mind a long time ago and left him a paranoid, bloodthirsty wreck of a man, whose only respite was being ruler of all in his mind. Number 17. Nina. We'll be honest guys, we know this has been a pretty sausage-heavy list, so we thought we'd round this out by chatting with you about what we think is the worst human being in all of Berserk, Nina. Nina is one of the prostitutes working for everyone's best girl Luca, and there are many reasons why the Berserk fandom hates her with a burning passion. Rightly so in our opinion. Nina is a character that is so caught up in trying to preserve herself and attempting to do the right thing that she often ends up doing the worst things possible. Like, joining a heretical sex cult that drinks cannibal soup and kissing a goat mask-wearing dude's member occasionally. Or suggesting that Luca ditch Casca at the first sign of inconvenience because she's worried she will get caught by Mozgus's men. Or trying to help Casca by taking her along with herself, only to get captured by her heretic buddies, who then try to cut out Nina's heart and sacrifice it to Casca, who they thought was a witch. Nina is such a pathetic person that despite wanting to be better than Luca all the time, the moment she's given a chance to prove it, she folds immediately. When Nina and Casca are captured by Farnace's people and taken to the Tower of Conviction for questioning, Nina folds immediately and spills all the beans. Not even a finger is ripped off, and she rats on the entire crew, and it made our blood boil seeing her cry about it after. And just to put the rotten cherry atop the crap cake that is her character, she was about to let Luca die, even though the latter saved her life on multiple occasions just in St. Albion itself. Nina is the most thankless character we've seen in Berserk overall, and the fact she thinks she's the victim in amongst all of it feels like a sick private joke Miura shared with his best friend Mori. The fact that he spent multiple panels showing Luca literally spanking Nina black and blue for her crazy antics was one of the more cathartic moments of Berserk, and it speaks volumes about her character itself. In the end, she didn't even have the guts to tell Luca she was leaving her group behind. Nina did so many things wrong that even with her STD, we felt no sympathy for her because God did this girl need a therapist and a gyno, stat. Marvelous verdict. And that's our list. Berserk is a story that has plenty of interesting primary and secondary characters, but these folks on our list are just downright evil. They're the kind of people whose thoughts and actions make the idea of evil grow stronger in the swirling abyss, and the culmination of their actions is set to blow over pretty soon as Berserk starts resuming serialization. Hopefully. But until then, who do you think are the worst people in Berserk? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And, as always, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, be safe out there, and have a marvelous day.